Hi, I'm Dale Sherbeck, and welcome to the HQ, a CHA Learning and Healthcare Camp podcast serial where we dive into healthcare issues and topics from the perspective of its people and discuss them with those that are leading in the health system. Together, we'll try to unpack these topics and learn what actions are being taken to innovatively solve them today. In this episode, we will continue to explore the very broad topic of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, and as it applies to Indigenous and First Nations peoples. According to Canada's census, roughly 5% of Canadians self-identify as Indigenous. But in some parts of our country, like our north, the percentage of Indigenous people are considerably higher, like 25% in the Yukon, or double and triple that in the NWT and Nunavut, respectively. So what does healthcare look like to Indigenous people in those territories, let alone the rest of Canada? What does a First Nations person experience with the health system? Do they see 25% of the people working in healthcare look like themselves? Why not? Why does this matter? Or how about the more burning question, how do we collectively fix this inequality in representation? The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's final report makes it clear that an equitable health system is paramount to reconciliation and healing in this country, where tens of thousands of Indigenous people and many more through intergenerational legacies have been harmed by the residential school system. And yet many more have been harmed and discriminated through our other publicly funded institutions, like our universal health system, which has ostensibly been designed to provide care and access to all those in need. Certainly the stories of people like Joyce Akeshawan or Brian Sinclair are testaments of the worst failings of our health system, and they leave many Canadians, myself included, ashamed and demanding change. And in our current context, where we have an unparalleled shortage of healthcare professionals, and yet Indigenous people remain the fastest growing population in Canada, there seems to be both a massive problem and an unquestionable opportunity in front of us. And most healthcare organizations are struggling with this and looking for ideas. The good news is that there are innovative leaders like my guest today, Laura Salmon, who are tackling this issue. And it shouldn't surprise you that these innovations aren't coming out of our biggest municipalities or provinces, but rather her strategies and initiatives are happening in one of our smallest territories, where Yukon Hospitals is making decolonization a priority. Laura Salmon started her professional career in nutrition when she moved to the Yukon over 20 years ago. She has been the director for First Nations health programs since 2013 and oversees a wide variety of Yukon Hospitals programs and services for Indigenous patients. Through her role, she is accountable for ensuring that the holistic health needs of self-identified patients are met by Yukon Hospitals. She also contributes to the planning and direction of corporate initiatives like Indigenization, transforming spaces, services, policies, and programs with a focus on youth and the future of healthcare. Originally from the Nak'atzeli-Whuthan First Nation in BC, she is now a seasoned Yukoner and enjoys the changing seasons. She makes the most of the long winter with skiing and long summer days with running and cycling. Hi, Laura, and welcome to the HQ.
So great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Dale.
Thank you. It's a privilege. And thank you for joining to have this conversation about a topic that's really, really important, I think, to all Canadians. So I don't pretend to know or be able to share the experience of being an Indigenous person in Canada. The TRC certainly directed several recommendations at healthcare, including that it increase the number of Aboriginal professionals working in the healthcare field. So I'm wondering if we can start the conversation today by discussing why underrepresentation is an issue and how it looks and feels to be an Indigenous person trying to navigate the health system.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about the TRC, and so I'm so happy to have the calls of action kind of guide the practices of organizations like ours. But our program's been around for 25, like almost 30 years. So a lot of what we were doing really predated the calls to action. And we use the calls to action now to kind of act as a guidepost and see if we're on the right direction. And then just, it's just provides a great way of framing and talking about what we should be continuing to do as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the workforce for us has been one of the earliest mandates of First Nations health programs when we were established over, in the early 90s. it was recognized then that we needed to have more of our people working at the hospital at all different levels. And it was even articulated in some of the early agreements that drove our program coming to be, that this would be a main part of what we would do as First Nations health programs. When we got going, we really developed the programs and services, our navigator positions, doing a lot of advocacy. The cultural programs got up and running with traditional food and traditional medicine, and interpretation services. So we were growing and building our program, and employment equity, I'm using air quotes, was how our mandate was framed. We weren't very active in that area, and yet we knew it was something that we needed to work on for all these years. The experience of First Nations people that come to the hospital is often poor. Their experience in being in the institutional environment, we know, is causes them to avoid seeking care, oftentimes either from the treatment, from the environment, or from the interactions with the service providers, and that has longstanding impacts on health. So we really wanted to start putting our money where our mouth was, and carve out some resources from our program dollars, and do some very proactive programming.
Yeah, so I think it's a good sort of point that you've been doing this for 30 years, or not you, but the organization, and so it probably does speak to part of the reason that the Yukon is so much further ahead in some respects than other parts of the country too, that are coming to this as mandated by the TRC or other kinds of legislation. So maybe for those that maybe don't, think it's obvious in terms of what needs to be done, or maybe haven't stopped to really think about the problem, why is it not just as simple as just saying, let's go hire more Indigenous people?
If only it was that simple, and we know the failure or the lack of progress in a lot of areas, jurisdictions, different levels of government, health regions. Simply working on that, downstream end of perhaps creating quotas, creating policies around, preferential hire and whatnot. Those are great. We all want to work towards having those kinds of things in place, because they do have their place. But really looking, a generation in advance, really looking very upstream, and creating the pathways towards working in health is really what needs to happen. And we've known that for a long time. And so that's why we're trying to be really disciplined about shifting a lot of our energy and making sure we're really prioritizing our focus on youth. Youth, it's just a really important principle, as they're the future of, they are the future, and certainly we should be looking to them as the future of healthcare. And so the upstream approaches doesn't necessarily mean even professional level training, or training in health professions. We're really getting down into the developmental levels of high school and even before then. So that's where we've made some good progress in the last couple of years in focusing on youth.
So maybe before we start talking about the program in a bit more detail, what traditionally would be the barriers for youth, I guess, to get engaged at this sort of level, or to think about healthcare as a profession or occupation?
Yeah, well, I think in the early days, we had a sense, and we were diving into the literature and whatnot, and what resonated with us was some writing, and it came from the States, and it's become a bit of our motto. But what we see as the barriers are like no information, no exposure, and no relationships. And so we've used that as a bit of a framework to organize some of our activities so that we are making relationships with young people really the foundation of our programming. Any kind of exposure and creating links with the hospital environment, and then the information, and just making sure all the right information is out there around health careers, and those all work together in harmony. But yeah, so those three elements.
Yeah, so I mean, it's breaking it down in terms of helping them to sort of be able to see and engage, I guess, with things that, to, I guess, whet their imagination in terms of what's possible, or to see people that they can relate to, perhaps, that work within the healthcare space, or demystifying the opportunities.
Yeah, and of course, just the family and community experience in the past, and that trickles down. So you have just an overall mistrust with health, science, organizations, and hospitals, and that translates from one generation down to young people. And so that's what we're learning, is that is often where we're at in terms of working for the hospital. You don't even contemplate working at a hospital if you don't even want to go there and get care.
Yeah, it's a good point, because there's a lot to unpack in that, and it's not just as simple as a career counselor coming into a school and saying, hey, did you ever think about being at this, right? If you have all these other cultural baggage that comes with it, right, that makes that even an impossible thing to even want to imagine, I suspect. So
absolutely.
So maybe we could start talking a little bit about what your upstream approach is, and what it entails, and how do you engage with the youth in this way?
Sure. Well, as we started to focus more on our Indigenous workforce initiative, we wanted to focus on upstream, and we wanted to create those opportunities and exposure. So an internship seemed like a model that could potentially work, and we did some trial and error and set things up as a bit of a pilot. We know when we're improving healthcare, we want to do things, small tests of change, and see how it goes and whatnot. So wanted to take definitely that improvement approach. But we wanted to create paid positions, funded paid positions, so that youth could work within the hospital environment, creating a safe environment as possible, and giving them as much or little personal and professional development as they needed as individuals. So working with every person individually to see where they were at, and go from there. So our internship program has started off small, and we feel like maintaining it as something quite manageable, and means about 6 interns per year on a bit of a rotating basis, so that we have some overlap, and we have peer support with having 2 at a time. And they start in a entry-level position. We created an actual position for interns. Fortunately, we have a really nice home base and safe starting point for our interns because of the existence of First Nations health programs within the hospital. We have an office. We have lots of mentors and positive role models of Indigenous people working in the hospital, and working as professionals in the environment. And so we're really fortunate to have that. And so as we work on, again, individualized personal and professional development, we start to look for areas that they can move into in other parts of the hospital. So working with managers and departments, along with the interests of the interns themselves, to see where they might want to, try out and what other areas of the hospital they could see and meet some people and just, be involved. So so they've been all over all the hospital in various departments, working on kind of extended placements in those areas. And then as the internship moves along, what we're really looking for is reaching our ultimate goals, which are to have them be, working in an area of the hospital, finding the work that that they would like to do and join our team, or go back to school and, advance their training in health careers. Or actually, and this is what we heard from Yukon First Nations themselves, is maybe they want to come back with increased skills and experience and ability to work for their First Nations governments. It's all well and good to have all our corporations attract and increase Indigenous people, but strengthening the workforce in our First Nations health departments and governments is equally as important, help strengthen the whole fabric of our territory. So so we just work toward those goals, and it's been really fulfilling to see, as we started out not sure what to expect and what kind of outcomes we might achieve. I think we're so happy to have it's been mutual learning from teaching and providing these opportunities to the young people, but what they teach us is just as much, if not more important.
Sure, if they bring context and real experiences that you're trying to serve to. Just to make it clear, so when you're talking about youth, I mean, how youthful are these interns that are coming into your programs?
Well, we have our age range, and the age range is quite broad, as is typical in some of these Indigenous programs, and it aligns with actually where we get some of our funding to meet the criteria for our partner organizations. So it goes up to 35, but we've really tended to work in from 16 into the 20-ish range, where we have some graduates who are maybe not in school and have maybe been contemplating what the next steps are for a little while. So that's the range, and of course the experience and needs of each of for whatever for each intern can be very, very different. So not having been really exposed to a work environment at all, and there's so much neat things, so many neat things to teach and expose them to with that, just not being intimidated by adults, working with machines and phones, speaking confidently in your role as a peer, as a worker, working with patients and families. So there's so much to learn. Just the things that we take for granted sometimes that you might have received in school or from your family or community. Working with a boss and managing expectations and keeping a to-do list, how to call when you're not going to be in, and what are the best ways to go about doing that. And it's been really neat to just hear the perspectives of where interns were before the internship and what their thoughts were about the work environment and the hospitals. And kind of what they learned throughout the experience. It's really neat. I want to read one little snippet. One of our interns said, before the internship, she thought hospitals were a bit depressing, smelly, and full of uptight hospital doctors and nurses.
Yes.
Which is so wise, and knowing that afterwards, they see that there's so much more than nurses and doctors. They can name, multiple departments for which we have dozens, so many different kinds of health professionals and administrators and support people that all work as a team to take care of people. So yeah, it's been really fulfilling.
Yeah, and I think coming back to one of your points at the earlier in the conversation, it's about then developing those relationships, right? That then create the capacity for understanding and empathy, perhaps on both sides of the relationship.
And the relationship building actually starts when I was saying, our upstream approach, even for the development and recruitment for the interns, that relationship building is really important. So some of our outreach activities have been to be in schools and be in part of programs where we can talk about the internship and what's happening at the hospitals and what initiatives we're working on. And we find that that's been really important. It's you can create a job and you can create an internship and just post in all the traditional ways and try to see who might apply, but you might not have that much success because you need to have those relationships. Young people really relate to having a relatable human that they know and they can put a face to a name and be able to call someone up and say, hey, about that internship you were talking about, I think I might want to apply, and how does that go? So we've gone beyond what a traditional HR posting and job promotion process would look like to just really being out there on the land as part of camps in some cases, in the classroom, and not just traditional classrooms, but some of the alternative programming, and have had great success. We've gone from having kind of handful of applicants on our first round or cohort to having over 50 in the most recent. So that really speaks to just the awareness out there that the hospital is part of the larger community that's really working on Indigenous programming. But I think the word travels about it being a good experience for the interns as well.
Yeah, it is amazing. I guess I'm sort of reflecting on some of what you're saying too, and just maybe like we do hear, I think, in our larger sort of social conversations, right, about the way our institutions are set up, right, that they create institutional models of discrimination, or even if it's not explicit racism, but certainly of discrimination, and they create barriers for access. And that what I'm hearing from your program is that it's a bridge, or perhaps it's even a way of taking, bringing recruitment to where people are and where they and how they interact with the world, and making it easier for them to engage in that respect. Because I guess what I'm sort of thinking is that our traditional white, I guess, models for recruitment and how to get a job, right, are barriers if that's not part of your own personal culture. And so you're breaking that down in some respects. Does that resonate, or am I?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other value, I think, is reciprocity, or sharing, kind of a two-way exchange. So we know it's not enough just to ask people to apply and come join our team. We just want to make sure that we're giving back as well. We're a small organization, and there's so much work to do, and we can't just be focusing on one thing at a time. So one thing that we've had some success with in our outreach is to join with other partners that are kind of youth serving organizations, or other First Nations and whatnot, and joining what it is that they're doing in programming with youth, and kind of jumping on board. And we've facilitated multiple health advocacy
Mhm.
type programming, and we don't call it that. We just say how to help out your family when they're in the hospital. So it's kind of like a providing some knowledge and some skills around what happens when your folks go to the hospital. What can you do to help make the journey easier? How can you what are your rights? What are the rights and responsibilities of patients versus health providers?
Mhm.
How can you advocate if you feel like things are maybe not going the way you think they should, or you're not being heard? And so these are things that young people wouldn't have really heard much about, and to have a kind of a youngish engaging facilitator from our team really connect with them on their level, and show that they can play a role, and they can be a positive force in health, regardless if they join our team or apply for the internship. They would have had heard about what role they can play and be speaking positively about health in their community.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's you're building some health literacy in that respect, and navigation skills which they can bring back to their family members or others in the community. That and this amazing trickle down effect of impacting one person and then impacting through them, right, dozens of others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Just knowing that several interns have reflected on their experience during the internship, and have learned that it can be a safe place. And if you kind of know your way around, and you can gain the supports of First Nations health programs or other allies within the organization, it can be a good experience, and people shouldn't shy away from getting care. And so they one intern wrote, I will implore to all my family to go to the hospital if they need to.
Mhm.
Whereas that might not have been the case before. And I think they'll just be that much more likely to access healthcare themselves, and have some skills in how to do that, and maybe know a few of us who are working here, and feel that it's a safe place.
So how long have you been running the program, and like how many people have come through the program so far?
It's only been 6, and we'll be recruiting for the next round here in the fall. And we initially thought we might try with 8, and we were successful in working with partners to see that there was some wage subsidy and whatnot. So
Mhm.
it wasn't that we couldn't afford to do it, but where we really didn't want to, what we didn't want to risk is not being able to invest in enough time and energy and attention in each individual intern, and also have just really good matches for where they can move to within the organization. So in fact, we have a lot of amazing internal partners in different departments, strong leaders who are willing and able to take interns. And First Nations Health Programs has the space and ability. We just want to make sure that we can just treat every intern like they're special, and give them the most support possible. So it's been 6, and we're really happy that half of them have decided to go back to school to go into health careers that they weren't previously considering. So nursing and social work in
Mhm.
particular. And we have a couple that got jobs within the hospital, working in people service oriented roles. So
Yeah.
that's a great outcome. And and during the internship, we had a couple of interns that hadn't completed high school on, the typical schedule, who we supported in just, working through the remaining pieces, and celebrated their graduations along with them. Yeah, so it's been really, really great to work and get to know and support these young people.
Yeah, I think it'd be very profound, right, to have those kinds of mentorship opportunities that just sort of help inspire, in terms of what the value of their education is, what the possibilities are to remove some of those anxieties about these big behemoths of organizations that they have heard about for years, or generations, that have been scary places, and that can be healing places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So, what is your mandate or goal for your programs in terms of, where do you end up going from here, or when are you successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did set up the internship as a pilot, and we wanted to just roll through it and be learning and tweaking it as we go along, and have made some changes. But our goal is to make a case for making it a permanent part of the organization, and we're really close to being able to do that. I think the evidence in the early stages really speaks to itself, that it is successful and that we have achieved what we set out to do. And I think we'll just continue providing these opportunities. Now, the youth internship is just really one part of our larger Indigenous workforce initiative. So there's all kinds of other behind the scenes, like a very long list of activities to achieve, our larger objectives of having a representative workforce. So here in Yukon, 25% of Yukoners self-identify as First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and of course the hospital should reflect that. And we have a ways to go. not quite there, and so as much as you say, these initiatives, they take a long time. It's hard to really see very noticeable change. It can take a generation, yes, but you can't wait a generation. Back when I was speaking about the early mandate, back in the early 90s, there was visions of seeing a representative workforce within 10 years. And it's 30 years later. It's not funny, but we have this report from the very early days, and it was from 1992, and we call it the typewriter report, because it feels like it predated computers even, where it had laid out what really needed to happen. And a lot of the recommendations are really relevant today, and we're trying to breathe life into them. This idea of upstream and multi layer kind of initiative. So we still want to work with our policy team and work on HR policies. We want to work on education and training. We know that cultural safety initiatives kind of have to work alongside workforce development, because without one, the other one's really at risk. So there's quite a lot we want to do, but for interns, we just want to just continue and take our current interns and create opportunities for them to be the leaders of the future in the program as well, to take their experiences and what they've learned and act as the peer mentors for future interns. So that's something we're looking forward to as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's being debated right across the country in all aspects, in terms of how do we get our education systems more involved in producing more healthcare professionals. But I think it's in terms of how do you engage Indigenous First Nations people in that particular conversation, right? I think what you're describing is that it requires specific tactics and intentions to sort of enable that to happen. What do you think is, I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but why is it taking this long for this to start to happen? And really it's maybe the question is, what did change that's made this happen possible? What was that enabler?
We had the mandate for 30 years and we dabbled. We did do some small activities that here and there, offering a summer placement or working on partnerships with the university to place social work students. And so there's been a number of things over the years, but it's never really been as comprehensive as well, I think it probably was just an improvement approach. In healthcare, sometimes we run around and we try to do all kinds of things and, stretch ourselves pretty thin among lots of initiatives and don't always have, all the ingredients we need to make them a success. And we know in the, healthcare improvement world that if you don't have all those ingredients in place, you risk having initiatives, improvements kind of flop. And that just, perpetuates, the risk of not having positive change in the future. So I'd say that's just, starting from the ground up and making sure there was some readiness and bringing the right people together, being really clear with what it is that we were trying to achieve, understanding the problem first and what problem we were trying to solve. So, and then researching the right solutions and which ones might be actually addressing the problem we were trying to solve. But I think we were also really guided by principles of indigenization as well as something we really wanted to try to increasingly understand and adopt as a corporation, and the principles are looking to the future and respecting and involving youth, and I think we were also guided, and some of the drivers were just the cultural values as well. And what we hear from our elders and from our community people is this is where you need to invest. We do hear a lot about elders and the importance of elder involvement and having them be just a part of the work we do. And we certainly do that within our program. But more and more, the teachings are, you have an elder and you have a youth. And so we wanted to see that there was always that balance and always that, that we were upholding that principle as well.
Is that working through the First Nations health programs is where the elders are sort of embedded in working as part of that? Or are they coming with the youth themselves? Or
no, that's just, they're just a part of our program. And have been from the early days, very active in the starting our program in the early days, periodically and helping us keep our cultural programs and protocols on track. And then they are available for some of the, the patient care work we do. So elder support can be supporting our staff or supporting patients in a cultural way.
So they form a kind of an advisory then to the work that you're doing, or like in a formal sort of structure. I guess I'm trying to imagine whether because we talk about in other parts of the health system involving patients and families as partners, right, in the work that we're doing, and whether that describes what you're talking about, or is it a bit different because of a different sense of ownership in terms of the relationship there as well?
Yeah, we have had, there's some unique and unique features of our governance. Our our governance of the hospitals that includes designated First Nations representatives on the board and a subcommittee with delegated authority to oversee First Nations health, as well as drive system-wide response to First Nations issues. And within First Nations health programs, we have had elders advisory groups in different forms over the almost 30 years, and do call upon them to be advisors as individuals, small groups, or more formal groups that are convened for specific initiatives. So it is kind of a day-to-day advisory role when it comes to the provision of traditional medicine to an individual patient, and that needs to be done in a way that respects healing and cultural protocols, or it might be looking at a policy, traditional food policy, in which case we convene elders that have those certain specialties. So we know we want to have some regional representation, language, there's 8 different language groups in the territory, so that might be something we need to consider if we're looking at language initiatives. There's experts in traditional food. There's some that we might call upon for more ceremonial purposes and whatnot. But it's a great benefit for the interns to be able to be part of First Nations Health Program and have that resource available to them as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm also, taking from that is like that is one of the benefits of representation, I guess, in some respects, that your population is represented on your boards in all these different spaces, which in themselves drives some of the thinking and the opportunities for innovation and doing things differently. So, and part of the reason I guess I say that or point it out is because, in the South, right here, right, many of the other hospitals and health authorities, right, don't necessarily have that as a part of their governance or their structures. And I think so for those that may be thinking that they want to do something similar to what you're doing in the Yukon, I'm thinking, well, then how do they start, right? I mean, and it does seem to, the use or the partnership with your elders and your communities is in a big part of how that happens.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've been running the internship, and we're sometimes a little bit light on the communications and reaching out with lots of the success stories. We've done that in a few small ways, and it's been picked up on by quite a few organizations that have learned about it, because they are grappling with how to do this and where do they start, and what would be some of the ingredients for success. And so we do have those talks and conversations like this one, and share and try to provide some advice, which usually includes a message around, not too cookie cutter. You really have to look, you can take some inspiration from what we're doing, but then really look at what your own context is and see how it might work there. Kind of sharing what some of the biggest risks are, which we also like to share, is that you really have to be ready to, like we have, just make sure that you have the resources to be able to support interns, so that you're not just doing more harm or creating an unsafe environment, or just perpetuating what they might have thought about the hospital in the first place, is bringing them into somewhere where it's quite intimidating. There's different power structures. They're not valued for what they bring. They're not offered the right amount of professional and personal development in order to succeed, different things. So that's usually some of our messaging. And so it's great, because I think there was, a recent example of another government department who had, talked to us and was very curious and wanted to learn about our internship program, and we shared generously with them. And we always kind of wonder, like, oh, well, a little bit pessimistic or skeptical about whether they'll actually do anything, or whether what they'll set up is not necessarily going to achieve outcomes. But we were really pleased to learn about an approach for, this specific government department who had invested. They created a specific position that seemed to have all the right, have the role be really clear, that really looked like it was kind of set up for success. So sometimes we don't have a lot of time and energy to share our story or spread what we're doing, but when we do, sometimes it seems worth it.
Yeah, I think it's, every opportunity for change or influence is a profound, part of change, right? And it's I think it's amazing what you guys are doing. But I think that your advice, right, is still that other organizations that want to do something similar, right, still need to do it in partnership with their community, right? Right, the First Nations, Indigenous people who they serve, and make sure that that they're involved in that, sort of to keep them honest and successful along the way. But I do think that maybe those other 30 years that you think that you didn't get to all the goals, maybe it did change or create opportunities that for the work that you're doing now to be successful, because people come into your hospital and maybe aren't seen entirely other or different, and there's a genuine desire for them to be successful.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, there's another Indigenous organization in town, and they're really interested in supporting youth, and we collaborate with them and have taken a little bit of a different approach, whereas we've got a few interns that we invest in quite heavily, and they kind of went with a big bang kind of approach where it was going to be quite a few positions over the summer, and have been reflecting on, we're kind of spread a little bit thin here, because we do have so many interns, and they all have their different challenges, and their need different kinds of support, and trying to mobilize that support, and so that's been great learning and sharing on how we're approaching it, and learning from each other, because we do sometimes, especially when we see that we can bring resources, and we might be able to invest more in the interns. We do want to see more and bigger, but we're really trying to be disciplined to keep it successful and scale it and spread it at a rate that's not going to backfire in terms of creating poor experiences or doing harm in the worst case.
Yeah, your compassion, I think, in that is very telling. So what, maybe before we sort of finish up here, Laura, just what is next for you in this space, and where do you see your programs moving, or your internship program? What's next in terms of this drive to find real meaningful representation within your organization?
The next phase is to really start looking at, because we will start growing, not maybe the number of cohorts, the number of interns that we currently work with, but we will have developed a bit of an alumni group, and we really want to focus some attention on keeping in touch and keeping tabs on what they're up to, from an evaluation perspective as well. What kind of an influence do we have, and what kind of long-term outcomes did we have? How'd they do in school, and what were the challenges, barriers, and learning from them, so we might be able to do as much as we can during the internship opportunity, to set them up for success. But it's also just really, we have gotten to know and love these people, and so that they know that they have they always have support people in us, something we want to just keep those relationships. So the alumni group, but then also just looking at the internship itself, and it's just an ongoing period of evaluation and reflecting on how we're doing. We want to see that we can use this group, either the alumni or the current interns, develop some confidence and some competencies, and maybe speaking and being a voice for themselves, their experiences, speaking for families and communities, so that we can enhance their role in being peoples with lived experience to inform, other initiatives. So we want to get some mental health infrastructure and programming going within the organization, and we know that youth are really highly impacted by mental health issues, and there's all kinds of access barriers and various things. So we want to really do the planning right for those kinds of initiatives, and it needs to include a youth voice. So how can we set up some of these young people to be able to safely be a part of those initiatives? So kind of bridging all of our work.
Yeah, it's a great resource to inform, like you say, your other work. So I think it's great. And I think it would be interesting to see some of these youth come back and themselves become, I guess, those mentors or for others that are coming behind them, to sort of follow in their footsteps and pay it forward or backwards. Or
well, I've told them all they can come and have my job whenever whenever they're ready. They just sit right here and be the director in the headquarters, as we call it.
Yeah, well, why not? It's that's succession planning at its best. So
exactly.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Laura, for sharing all of your work. If there's any other last words that you want to share before we say goodbye, last words to you.
Thank you. Well, I just think that the opportunity, I thank you for the opportunity. It's always great to just take the time to reflect and share. And I think I said it earlier, we learned so much from the interns, more than we could possibly teach them. And I think that's just a message for hopefully to inspire other people in the sector to think about just everything they're doing and how a youth might be involved, because it is such a rich and gratifying experience.
Yeah, well, nicely said, and I hope that does inspire others to do the same. I think the opportunities around us all, so I don't think there's anything to stop anyone from trying to do something similar and to learn. So thank you very much, Laura. Wish you well, and enjoy the rest of your summer.
Thank you. You too.
Take care.
Bye now.
You've been listening to the HQ, and I'm Dale Sherback, your host. You can find this and other future episodes on the CHA Learning website, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. We'd love to hear what you think, so please follow us on our other social media channels. Thanks for joining us in this discussion today. Please join us next time.